We have our process designed and configured all of the steps. We must define who are going to be our approvers number 1 and number 2 for this two-stage approval process. There are a couple of ways to do this. One would be to assign the role to a fixed user. So in our approver number 1 role, we will set the user John Doe as the user that will perform the tasks of approver number 1. We could do the same thing for approver number 2, or we could leave it open so that approver number 1 can select it when responding to their task. On any interactive step, we can choose who is going to perform a following task. On the approval number 1 task, we will choose who will be approver number 2. To do this, we go to the role scope section and we will see a list of the roles currently on the system. Now we will set approver number 2 as editable so that we can configure it during this task. Once this is done, we will set the version as a production version. We could add a comment here, for example, first test, and then we save our design. The system will validate that it is correct, and the design is now deployed in production. Now we will move on to the flow management site. On the Start Flow section, we will see a form, which is our two-stage approval process. We can start it by clicking on it. We will enter a name, and we could also enter a description if we wanted to. Now we can start the flow. Here we will see a summary of the start of the flow, as well as some additional information. Depending on the permissions that we have on the flow, we will be able to see on the Flow Details tab, in Design, the flowchart of our diagram. We can see that it's currently waiting for approval number 1 to be completed. If we click on Tracking, we can see a list of tasks that have been executed, which for now is just the application form, as well as the approval number 1 task, which is assigned to John Doe and has not been completed yet. We can also see the flow's active tasks. And what we can do here is, for example, instead of John Doe responding to this task, I can delegate it to my user so that we can give it a response right now. Note that this is not always done and permissions are needed to delegate tasks like I'm going to do right now. I will now assign it to myself. And you will now see in my list of pending tasks, there's one task to respond. I would also receive this notification by email, and the task can be responded on a phone or on the computer. Let's see this task now. What we see here is the tasks form, with the 2 buttons that correspond to each possible response, as well as a field to choose the user that will fulfill the role of approver number 2. Let's assign Jane Smith as approver number 2, and we will write a very simple comment. Now Qflow will evaluate the response of approval number 1, and it will decide which path to take to continue the flow. If we go to the details, we can see that it is waiting. And if we look at the diagram, we can see that it is waiting at approval number 2. And here we can do the same thing we did before. In the Tracking tab, we can see a list of all the actions that have been made. And we can see that approver number 2 is currently assigned to Jane Smith. Once again, as a part of this demonstration, I will delegate Jane's task to myself so that we can respond it right now. We can see that it appears again on our list of pending tasks, and it is the second approval. Being the second approval, we can see the previous comment history. I will not be able to define another role here since we didn't configure this in our model, but I can add a simple comment. This process will go again through the Qflow engine to be evaluated and decided upon to know which way to continue. If we go again to the flow details, we can see that it is already finished. The following steps, like the notification, are automatic and require no user input. Once the approval number 2 was evaluated, the decision is made to continue to the notification of the approval. And this will send an email to the corresponding user, and the flow will advance to the ending event, and it will be finished. If I want to see what was notified to me in this case when my application was approved, we will see a form with all the steps that occurred, all the responses, the dates, the users that responded to these tasks, and the comments.